Alright, so we're checking out the new GEPRC Mark5 in this video. This is their new flagship 5-inch freestyle quad. So this comes in 3 different versions. The one you're looking at here is the one with the DJI and the Vista here in the back. They do have the DJI with the full-size air unit. If you're interested in the full-size air unit, of course it'll be a little bit heavier. They both come with the standard DJI camera, which is the larger 20mm width camera. And there's also a analog version with the Caddx Vista, the Caddx Ratel V2 and the 1.6 watt Rad VTX for analog. So that one's going to be the lightest setup. All 3 of these versions come in a 4S and a 6S version. And I think the KV is 1960 for the 6S and 2450 for the 4S versions. I'll have a lot to say about the motors here in a moment. So when you look at this new frame design, it's pretty typical of a 5-inch that you see these days. You have this staggered bottom plate design here, where the bottom plate here and the secondary bottom plate sandwiches the arms. So these bottom plates are 2.5mm thick and the arms are 5mm thick, and that's pretty standard for these days. So basically this larger area in the front here with this lower plate here, and then a smaller area in the back here with this higher plate here because it's staggered. And then the top plate's also 2.5mm thick. 5mm arms, pretty standard these days. The geometry of this frame is pretty typical freestyle H-style frame. So it's 225mm wheelbase, motor to motor, 175mm side to side, and 140mm front to back. So it is a squish decks or an H-style frame. So quite a bit different from their Mark 4, which was H-style, but the arms were more in the back where they met in the on the bottom plate, more in the back and the front. This is more of a contemporary design with the arms kind of like sandwiched like that. That is pretty typical nowadays. They have this new cage here in the front. This is aluminum alloy, so it's lighter, and a really unique camera mount here. So this is the stock mount that came already attached with these 4 screws that go into the aluminum side plates, and then there's like a gap there, and there's a little M2 standoff right here that goes to their side. But if you can swap this out, this is for like a standard GoPro 3-prong or 2-prong mount here, which I have. I flew with a Hero 6, but you can swap this out. They have another one that you could use for smaller cameras, like an Insta360 Go 2 or Caddx Peanut. That's also included in the box. But here in the this little section here behind the camera, you have a capacitor and also a buzzer. The capacitor obviously is here, whereas the battery lead is in the back. So there's a wire or a couple wires that go from there to the place where the capacitor is being held. I mean, it looks nice in terms of it being clean, and you have a nice little 3D print here to hold everything. But I think you want the capacitor back here where the battery lead comes in this gap here between the flight stack and the Vista for optimal use of the capacitor. But yeah, this is what they went with. So I'm not sure how much an effect that'll have in terms of the effectiveness of the capacitor being a little bit further away. But yeah, that's just the way they designed this layout here. So the stack here is their Span F722 HD stack. This has it's obviously both 30x30 boards, 50 amp, 32-bit ESC. So pretty good size ESC for this setup. 50 amps is pretty much typical of your range in the 5-inch for this class. So that's pretty normal. F7 flight controller, that's pretty standard these days as well. This one does come with, I think, 6 UARTs, and one of them is dedicated to the Bluetooth radio. So if you want to use the SpeedyBee app to connect to this flight controller, you can do that to make changes in the field with your phone. The back here where the Vista is kind of interesting. So obviously they have designed the frame so you can carry a full-size air unit. But because the Vista is smaller and they have this kind of raised up here with this is basically just some foam, so that the Vista kind of sits on there. It takes up that little bit of a space that the air unit would eat up, and then they're using foam instead of like a 3D printed part just to save a little bit of weight. So I kind of like that. There's plenty of space back there for a receiver. This one here did not come with a receiver, so I just flew with my DJI transmitter, but you can add a receiver, of course, if you want, and it does come with an Express LRS version and Crossfire, I think a FreeSky version as well. This one here is just a standard DJI version or plug-and-play version for DJI, and if you have the DJI transmitter, you can just use that, or you can add your own receiver. So just taking a closer look at the carbon, you know, pretty typical of GEPRC, very nice. Chamfered edges here is all clean, no carbon dust. You know, this is pretty standard for GEPRC. I do like the little motor bumpers here on the bottom, so the landing feet plus the little arm bumpers on the edge to protect the motors. So this is overall, I think, a pretty good frame. It's going to probably hold up to a lot of crashes for the freestyle guys, and it's not super light, not super heavy. It's kind of in the average range. They went with these SpeedX V2s. Yeah, SpeedX 2s. It's a very unusual size. This is one I haven't seen before. It's a 2107.5, and this one is a 6S version in 1960 kV. So they are going with so the stator is basically not as wide as your traditional 5-inch freestyle motor. Let's say, when I say traditional, something like a 2306 is what I consider kind of normal for a 5-inch. I think that's sort of become sort of the de facto standard that most people will build their 5-inch freestyle quads on. That's a wider stator, but not as tall. So this is 21 millimeters wide by 7.5 millimeters tall, versus your typical 5-inch is going to have a 23 millimeter wide and a 6 millimeter tall stator. So what this means is this motor is a little bit lighter than the 2306 motor that GEPRC sells. So this is, according to their specs, it's about 29.5 grams. And the 2306 is 32 grams. So it's about 2.5 grams difference. So overall, you're saving about 10 grams of weight. However, for this coming in at around 400 something grams, 10 grams of weight savings is, in my opinion, kind of meaningless. They do have a lot of footage on their YouTube channel. They have like a promotional video of this thing kind of flying around. They're calling this freestyle, but almost everything you see there is just basically cinematic flying. You know, obviously very nice footage. They're using a GoPro Hero 10. Pretty obviously they're using Hypersmooth or Real Steady Go or something like that. I mean, the footage is great and it looks fantastic. No real surprises there. I mean, and for this sort of 5-inch quad with this motor setup, that kind of footage is easily attainable. Not really any kind of a problem. But if you're trying to fly this like a true freestyle quad where you're doing dives, split S's, power loops, that kind of thing, in my opinion, this is very subjective, of course, you know, I would have preferred the 2306 motor for that kind of flying. You're going to get better low-end torque or low-end responsiveness, which is good for coming out of dives and stuff when you're kind of like free-falling and you want to pull out of something without hitting the ground. And I don't feel like this motor with the narrower 21 millimeter stator is as responsive as a 23 millimeter stator. Now the converse effect is with the taller stator, you get massive amounts of top end. So at the top end of the throttle, you get lots of power, and you can see it in the flight footage I'll show you at the end in my narrated flight. So if that's the kind of motor responsiveness you want, where you're mainly in the higher end of the throttle and you're really pushing it and just want lots of speed, but also with much shorter flight times, then this motor is probably for you. I personally would, if I was gonna, I don't know, I would go with a different motor on this one. I just don't really feel like it suits my flying style. So this is completely subjective, you know, in terms of what kind of motor is good or bad. This is a new motor that I don't think anyone or any manufacturer is using in terms of the size. It's more like a 1507 motor in terms of feel. If you go down to like a smaller quad, like a 3 or 4 inch, that's what it feels like to me in terms of like how it reacts at the bottom of the throttle, and you get sort of like that floatiness at the end, so it kind of bounces up and down, and you don't feel like you have as much control of it at the low end of the throttle. So I think, for this, like the KV and 6S might be a little high in terms of trying to get the flight time you want. I flew with a 1000 milliamp hour 6S battery. Their recommended range for 6S is 1050 to 1550, and depending on the size of the battery and how it will fit on the back plate here, on the top plate, you probably want to go with a bigger battery. So 1300 is probably what I would recommend, 1300 milliamp hour 6S, to get like the good balance between weight and flight time. I think 1000 milliamp hour is a little bit on the small side or short side. I'm only getting like 3.5-4 minutes of flights on the 1000 milliamp hour battery. If you want more flight time, just go with like a 1550. And I think if you go heavier, then the pitch tune's going to get affected. So at least in terms of my flying, even on the 1000 milliamp hour with the GoPro Hero 6, the pitch tune was totally fine. I didn't get a lot of bounce backs, no weird like oscillations like that, and I didn't get hot motors or anything like that. So the pitch tune out of the box, pretty good for the setup. But again, it's just a feel for how the motor reacts at the low end of the throttle with that narrower 21 millimeter stator. I think that's at least for me, it would not be my first choice for a 5-inch freestyle car. I think this one, for me, I would go with like a 2306 or maybe even like a 2406 motor. Of course, the 2406 motor is much heavier, but you'll be able to carry more weight. So if you go with something like this and you swap out the motors for like a 2406 and then go with like a 6S 1550 or maybe 1800, you can probably carry that no problem. That'll probably give you really good performance and flight time for this sort of frame. That's just my thoughts on that. All right, so this is how much the quad weighs with the camera holder and nothing else. So about 421 grams. And then with the Hero 6 here, I'll toss that on. Now we're at 545 grams. And then with the 1000 milliamp hour 6S, the all-up weight goes up to 673 grams. So that is pretty typical of pretty average in terms of weight for a 5-inch, which is why I don't see that much of an advantage of going to this slightly lighter motor. I would just go with the heavier motor, and 10 grams of additional weight going up to 683 grams isn't really going to make much of a difference in terms of the performance. And I think you're going to get a better overall feel for the motor. At least I think most people will prefer the 2306 motor on this. Alright, so I think that's going to do it for this video. Here's the narrated flight. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. So these 2107.5 motors seem to have pretty decent power. This is the size I haven't flown before, so not really sure what to expect. They remind me a lot of the 2208 motors that I've flown before. I don't feel like I have as much low-end throttle control. Whoa, it's got a lot of high end. It's got some pretty wicked punch out. Oh yeah, you can hear that in the props. So far, no weird stuff going on. Yeah, nice stop there. No prop washout. A little bit of wind today. Yeah, you can see that where it kind of pops up like that there. That's the low end of the throttle doesn't feel like I have as much control. You know, a little bobbling there. That could be tuned out with a little bit of throttle expo, but that's because of the size of this motor, where it's sort of skinny but tall. This reminds me a lot of like the 1508 motors. They're kind of tall but kind of skinny. That's a characteristic of that. I actually prefer like the pancake style motors, where they're wider, not as tall. So like the 2306 or 2305 motor has a better feel in the low end of the throttle, so you have better control coming out of those like dives and stuff. So I have to be a little bit more conscious about how I manage the throttle on the low end when I come out of those dives, but it's, you know, it's like anything, you can get used to it. I know a lot of people that fly these kind of taller motors. I think I'm getting a low battery warning already. Crazy. Yep. I'm getting a low battery warning. This is a 1000 milliamp hour 6S battery, by the way. So you probably want a 1500 or something bigger, like maybe 1300 6S for more flight time. I'm just gonna do a little bit of, if you're kind of aggressive in the throttle, you're gonna want more battery. It flies pretty good. Just I'm not really confident that this motor is what freestyle pilots will want. I think they're going to want something like a 20, I don't know, something with a wider stator, I think. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for this one. Talk to you later.